Welcome back to Biological Fitness. Today we are going to take a look at the low back. And the main point here is that this is an area of the body where many people work too hard. So this connects to a theme that we've already discussed before, that easy, efficient, pleasurable movement, it comes from a sense of distributing your efforts equally throughout the body. And we could also specifically say distributing the work equally throughout the length of the spine. And the length of the spine, just like the quality of your breathing, the length of your spine is a place that you can always look to get an indication of how you're doing overall. So there's a way that your spine may have a, let's just say a kind of a certain length before you begin a movement. But then as you make the movement, even this gesture of reaching with your hand like this, something like that, does it change the length of your spine? Because of course, every movement you make is going to change your configuration in space. It's going to change your balance, and it's going to change the demand on your musculature to hold you up. And so sometimes what happens is you'll make a movement, maybe it imbalances you in some way, and there's a way that you lose your alignment and the spine compresses. But in this awareness through movement lesson, as we are so often doing, we'll actually be lying on the floor on the back. So the question of balance, it is there, but it's certainly minimized. But we're going to be doing movements with the legs, and we're going to be constantly listening to what's going on in the back. Is the back participating, or can the muscles in the back be quiet? And you'll see when we get to the actual lesson what the movements are and how that works. But in terms of the awareness, this question of the length of the spine is something that we're going to be again and again paying attention to as we go through the process, which sort of on the surface of things will look like we're doing a lot of movements with the legs. But of course, the legs have considerable weight in your body. So as you move that weight, what happens in your back? Okay, and I'll just also remind you of a piece of what we did last time. That was the lesson where we were standing up from the chair, and we were just noticing as we were going up and sitting back down, and when sometimes the movements felt a little more challenging, and then what happened that made the movements get a little bit easier. And there was this sense of this quality of the weight of the body and gravity, whether it has a sense of being able to float upwards or does it kind of sink downwards. And that actually could be linked to a kind of emotional quality. So when your body feels heavy, what's the emotional experience? When your body feels light, what's the emotional experience? So that's another way to pay attention as you go through a process of movement. Because I will say also about what we're going to do, there's actually going to be a fair amount of movement. So Feldenkrais method has this kind of reputation for always being gentle. And I think that's a little bit simplified, right? There's going to be plenty of chances in this lesson to burn calories, if you want to think of it that way. But of course, burning calories is not the point. I'm simply saying that there will be work involved, but what we want to do is listen to the quality of the movements. And one way of listening to quality is also listening to the emotional quality. So do you get so involved with completing the movement and maybe even sort of giving yourself internally a stamp of succeeding or failing with every single movement? And the most important thing becomes, I did the movement. There I go, I did it. Or if you initiate a movement and you're able to feel that actually the quality isn't really to your liking, it's not as smooth or as easy or as efficient as you'd like it to be, could you actually stop, not complete the movement, and go back to the starting position, pause, wait, allow the activation of that movement to dissipate so that you can try again with a fresh attention and maybe with a fresh kind of an attitude where it's not so important if this movement comes to completion or not. Because after all, what are you doing? You're coming to a movement class and you're listening to someone describe a series of movements and you're trying out what the person says. But there's no reason why me, or really for that matter, any other teacher who is giving you a series of tasks, if you're doing it for your own betterment, you are the authority, not the teacher, in a very important way, which is that you're inside your own body. You feel what's going on. The teacher is there to guide you, to help you notice things you may have not noticed before. They're there to provide you with the particular movements that might be helpful. But apart from what the teacher has to offer, you yourself have an irreplaceable role, right, in modulating what you're doing so that it fits how you are feeling today. And so I'm going to give you quite a bit of movement in this awareness through movement lesson to explore, but I'm going to be encouraging you again and again to be curious, to be gentle with yourself. And what's interesting about it is because we're trying to, in particular, minimize the excess work that you're doing in the low back, or that you may be doing in the low back, that does mean you might have to discover how to do some work in other places that aren't used to working. So there's even a sense that there's a kind of a slogan that is often associated with the Feldenkrais method, which is do less, do less. And there is a way that that's a good slogan, because most of us are doing too much most of the time. But if we're doing too much somewhere, it's just like if you were carrying something heavy, it'd be easier if you had a friend to help you, right? So somewhere in your body, you might actually have to do more in order to have the overall experience of doing less, to have the feeling that you're not just exerting quite so much. All right, so that's, I just thought, important to include as part of the perspective of what we're doing. Again, the Feldenkrais method is so much more than just a movement practice, but it's really getting deeper into how do you relate to yourself and how do you relate to the world. So as we do the movements today, I hope you can perhaps have a bit of a broader frame for the context of what you're doing along these lines. All right. So just briefly, please begin in standing. What we will do is going to be lying on the back, but stand for a moment and get a sense of the length of your spine in standing. And if you like, you can use an image of the head floating upwards. Maybe that helps you find just a little more length right now, but don't do anything that involves invoking extra effort. And now I'm going to ask you to do a simple movement, and the movement is not the point. The point is the length of the spine. So what happens to the length of your spine if you think that you wanted to take a step and you bend one knee to begin taking a step? Did your head sink when you did that? So put the leg back and just try that a few times, and don't think about what the spine should do. Maybe we're going to develop ideas about that when we go through what we're doing, but what we're interested in here is just what is happening. So try this with one leg and try it with the other. And just see, does your head move up towards the ceiling? Of course, when you lift one leg, it means you're going to bring the weight onto the other leg. And if you were walking, you're picking up one leg and picking up the other. So you're not walking at this point, but it's as if you're investigating a little moment and walking. And so whatever's happening, just try that out. Think of reaching the top of your head towards the ceiling as you bend one knee and begin to lift one foot. And notice the weight of the leg when you do that. In other words, your feeling of the weight of the leg. The weight of the leg probably doesn't change, but if you do that, or if you pick up the foot and bend the knee in such a way that you sink a little bit, what does the leg feel like there? And try this with each leg. And then just walk through the room, but continuing to listen to the length of your spine. And of course, now you are picking up one leg and picking up the other one. So notice if you have a sense of like it's easier to get tall over one leg. It's easier for your head to float upwards as you lift one knee compared to the other one. Okay, and then please lie on your back on the floor. And you can choose to have your legs long, or you can bend your knees and stand your feet. So once you've arrived on your back, just listen to your breathing come and go for a few breaths. And then once again, bring your attention to the length of your spine. And now gently roll your head a little left and right, but go very slowly. And again, listen to the length of your spine. So as you roll your head, of course, the shape of your spine changes. But you might notice when your head goes to one side, there's a sense that one side of the neck is lengthening. The other side is shortening. But if you think of the whole length of your spine as having two sides to it, right? Think of two stripes down your back. And you can feel how one of those stripes gets a little longer as the head goes to the side and the other. But even though the shape of the spine changes a little bit, can you have a sense of when does your spine maintain more of its length? When your head goes to the right or to the left? And maybe that corresponds to a feeling of simply the head being more comfortable turning one side compared to the other. Okay, leave your head in the middle. But now please pay attention to your low back. And here, what you've done with your legs, I mentioned two different options, that influences the shape of your low back. So again, notice the length of your spine and notice in particular that area of the lumbar arch. And notice how much space is there between your low back and the floor. And if you pay attention more on the right and then more on the left, is there one side of the low back that's closer or further from the floor? And now, in a moment, I'll ask you to do another movement, but remember, we're interested in the length of the spine. So pay attention to the length of the spine as you make this transition. So simply put your legs in the other position. In other words, if you had your legs long just now, please put your feet standing. And if you had your feet standing, put your legs long. But did you notice what happened to the length of your spine as you made that transition? So a few times, you don't have to do this quickly, but change the position of your legs between having your legs long or having the feet standing, and just notice what happens in your low back. And also notice, because your legs have considerable weight, How exactly do you make this transition? So what do you do with your knees? Do they point to the ceiling the whole time? Do you take the knees inwards or outwards when you change the position of the legs? Do you move the legs simultaneously? Do you move them one at a time? And every time you move, what's going on in your spine, especially in the low back? Do you find that you have to do some work in your low back as you change the position of the legs? And of course, if you do something in your low back, it also changes the overall length of the spine. So you can listen to your low back, and you can also listen to the whole line from your coccyx up to the base of your skull. Okay, so maybe you're making some discoveries here. This is really just for the purpose of observation that we're doing those movements, but we are going to keep working with that idea. So have your feet standing now and rest with the feet standing. And probably you already noticed that this position of the legs makes it a bit easier to have the low back close to the floor. Notice the pressure on the soles of your feet. And you might remember that in an earlier class, you were standing the feet like this and lifting the pelvis into the air. I'm not going to ask you to do that now, but if you imagined that you were about to lift the pelvis into the air, would you reposition your feet at all? So try that. Put your feet as if you wanted to lift the weight of the pelvis up into the air, and just see if you find a new way of grounding yourself. Okay, now from here, please bring your attention to your right knee, your right leg. And make a movement that's very, very small at first. And that is to just begin tilting the right knee out to the right, but only go a very small amount and then bring the knee back up over the foot. And just feel what kind of work takes place, because you're not taking the knee all the way over and down to the floor. You're just tilting it out a little bit. So there's a way you have to hold the weight of the leg. Just make a small movement and come back. But in particular, notice the pressure on the back of your pelvis. Does it shift? Or do you simply make the movement in your hip joint? Some people have a lot of mobility in the hip joints, and they could just let the leg go all the way out to the side and the pelvis never moves. For other people, the pelvis begins to roll almost immediately as the leg moves out to the side. So just feel what's happening for you. And then again, also listen to what's happening in your low back and throughout the entire length of the spine. Okay, bring the knee back over the foot, just leave it pointing to the ceiling. Try the same experiment with your left knee. And just right away feel, is it easier to hold the weight of the left leg, or was it easier with the right leg? And even if you kind of feel like you're not exactly sure what the secret to making this movement lighter and lighter might be, well, one thing you do know from our previous classes is that if you hold your breath, that's likely to mean you're doing more work. So just monitor the quality of your breathing here. There is an effort involved in holding the leg, but what kind of effort allows the breath to be free and simple? And now just moving no more than 2 inches, let's say. Take one knee out to the side and bring it back, and the other. But see if you can make the movement even slower so you can really control the speed. And with your attention, you're also controlling the quality of your breath. And just find out, what if you also included an image of lengthening the spine so that the top of the spine was moving up, the bottom of the spine was moving down? Does that do something to the quality of the movement? Does that impact your ability to have an easy breath as you make these movements? Okay, go ahead and rest. Keep the feet standing. And now go back to making the movement with the right knee, moving out to the right. And now let the knee go a little bit further each time. Still try to have a real sense of control of the movement of the knee, so it's not just falling. And depending on, again, your particular history and the way your body is, you'll feel maybe that there's a certain moment where taking the knee further out to the side would not be comfortable. So when you get to that point, you'll notice what you're doing also is that you're rolling to the outside of your right foot. So when you get to that place where the knee doesn't want to keep moving out to the right, feel that you can now just slide your foot on the outer edge down the floor, and then the leg is long. And when you've done that, just pause. You have the left foot still standing and the right leg long. Just feel the shape of your skeleton here. Try to imagine the line of each leg, one bent, one long, the position of your pelvis, and the shape of your low back. And now, slowly begin to roll your right leg out to the right, just a tiny amount, and come back. So you're rolling over the heel, moving toward the outside and coming back. Each movement takes your pinky toe a little closer to the floor. And of course, this is a movement that involves your whole leg. So feel what happens in the knee as you do this, the upper leg, and in the right side of your groin, in the right hip joint. And if you want to continue taking the leg to the outside, rolling away from the midline, you'll feel just like when the foot was standing and you were tilting the leg out to the side, there may be a sort of a place where it feels like you can't just keep rotating. And at that moment, you could begin to slowly drag your right heel up the floor a little bit. And just start with a very small movement. So roll the leg to the outside, and when you feel internally that it just makes sense, you begin to draw the right heel up in the direction of your right sit bone, and the right knee will be bending out to the right. And then lengthen the leg again. As you keep doing this, like with the previous movement, begin to listen to the length of your spine, the quality of your breathing, and the feeling of the overall weight of the leg. It's close to the floor here, but the more you drag your heel up, the more you probably begin to really sense the weight of the leg. And what happens with your pelvis? What happens in your low back? So if you continue the movement now, you rotate the leg to the outside, you begin to draw the heel up, and the right knee is bending, and it's bending a little more. And then there's a certain moment where you can't drag the heel any further up. And at that moment, you just bring the knee back up over the foot, and you have the foot standing again. So now explore the same kind of process with your left leg, and take your time. Don't rush to the end. Just begin by tilting the knee a little bit out to the side, and then a little more, You might make several movements before you get to the point of lengthening the leg down. And you want to feel on this side maybe quite different. But make these movements in a way that the movement provides the context for your exploration, but really what's important here is the length of the spine, quality of the breath. Even the expression on your face. Can your face be soft? Can you have a demeanor that shows you that you're treating yourself kindly as you do this? Once you have the left leg long on the floor, you can pause and then begin the process. First of just simply rolling the leg to the outside, because you could stand the foot right away, but that's not the point. You're trying to find out at every stage of the movement, how can this feel simple? So you roll the leg to the outside, but you want to sense, am I straining already to do that? Am I trying to press my foot towards the floor? Does the knee have a sense of when to bend and how to make space inside the joint? When you begin to pull the knee, or rather, when you begin to pull the heel up the floor and the knee goes out to the side, what's the relationship of the movement of the knee and the movement of the heel? You can feel when the leg is totally long, it's as if the heel and the knee are in a line, and then the knee's going to go to the outside and the heel maybe goes a little bit to the inside. You come up, and then there's a moment that eventually you can stand the left foot. And so now go back and forth between your two legs, and just one at a time, you take the knee out to the side, and then you lengthen the leg down. You pause for a moment, and then you roll the leg back out to the side again and draw the heel up the floor until you can stand the foot. But as you do this, just notice the quality of how you make the movement with each leg. If it's simpler on one side, what is it that you're doing differently there? Again, listen to the length of your spine, quality of your breathing, the expression on your face. Include rests. So you kind of have a menu of movements at this point that you've discovered. But now, in a sense, you're just practicing. And your practice is not about repetition and accumulating a quantity of movements, but it's about trying to make every movement you do more comfortable than the last one. Okay, take a rest now and lengthen both legs on the floor. Feel how your breath is moving. Notice if it's sped up a little bit with the movements you were making. If that's the case, just allow it to slow down again. And how does your low back relate to the floor now compared to a few minutes before? And now go back to this same exploration, except the leg that's not moving stays long. Before, you were moving one leg with the other leg standing. So what's it like, for example, to roll the left leg out to the side, draw up the heel and stand the left leg, but the right leg remains long? So each time you bring one foot to standing, then you take the knee out to the side and you lengthen the leg, and then you try the same thing with the other leg. Now, it's really important to also point out that as you make these movements, you don't have to complete them. You might begin to draw the leg up, and bend the knee. And then you're about to stand the foot, but you just feel you're already doing a lot of effort. So don't stand the foot, just lengthen the leg again. You could do a lot of partial movements so that you can notice what is the particular moment where the strain begins. Or if you begin with the foot standing and you begin to lower the knee to the floor, but there's a moment in the lowering where you feel that you have to clench. And that might be the moment that the length of your spine changes. Well, can you go back and start over and then a little more mindfully go through that particular part of the movement in such a way that you don't disturb yourself? Okay, so now have both feet standing or have both legs long. Just have both feet in the same position. But now try making this movement with both legs simultaneously. If the feet are standing, both of the knees move away from each other and the legs lengthen down together, or if the legs are long, you're rolling the feet, rolling the legs away from each other in the beginning, but then very quickly after that, you find the moment of dragging the heels up off the floor. So when you move the legs simultaneously, the other leg doesn't provide the stability it was providing before. There was a way when you move one leg that the other one anchors you a bit, but now you're moving both legs. What's happening to the space behind your low back? Now, just as an idea, what would it mean to do these movements and avoid increasing that space? Now, if you feel that you are arching in the low back every time you make the movement, that suggestion maybe just doesn't seem to make any sense. But the next time you make the movement, listen for work you may be doing in the low back. And if you feel that you begin to work there, can you actually stop and start over? And so you might find that, again, you're making incomplete movements. But again, make that more important. In other words, more important than completing the movement. And then if you make a movement where you arch the back, but you arch a little less than you did before, well, that's the direction that we're interested in going. So again, not important to complete the movement. But now go ahead and take a rest. Just think about that idea that the legs could change position, but the low back wouldn't need to be disturbed so much. So have the legs long and have your arms at your side with the palms facing down to the floor. And now slowly, imagine that you wanted to reach both hands down towards your feet, but they're not going to go very far. But just feel that little activation. Reach downwards with both hands and then let go. Just feel, what do you do with your shoulders? What happens with the shoulder blades? Can they slide a little down your back? But you're not so interested in even your hands traveling down the floor here. You're just feeling that activation. And feel what happens through your spine when you do this. Can you imagine that someone had their hand on top of your head? It's almost like you're trying to push the floor down, but maybe the top of your head would reach up into that person's hand as your arms were reaching down. Okay. Now, to make this clear, just stop that for a moment. But you're probably aware that for many of us, if we tense, we begin to shrug our shoulders up towards our ears. So don't do anything drastic, but kind of do that. Pull your shoulders up towards your ears and notice what happens to your neck. Do you feel that your head kind of gets pulled down? Do you feel that there's a compression there? Okay, so this reaching down idea, it's about doing the opposite of that. So is there a way to make this reaching movement downwards in such a way that it helps you maintain length through your spine? Okay, so pause with that for a moment and come back to your legs. And now the legs should be long, but begin to make the movement of bringing the left foot up to standing in this way where the knee goes out to the side. Some people call these movements frog leg movements. But listen to the length of your spine. And if you feel that the spine wants to get shorter here, could you use a movement of reaching down with your right arm as a way of kind of counterbalancing what you're doing with the left leg as you bring it up? And then if the left foot is standing, same thing when you take the knee out to the side and you lengthen the leg. Again, is there a way that you could just subtly, perhaps, but you could activate some way through your right arm, right side of your chest. And if you like, you could think again that that person has their hand on the top of your head. And what you don't want to do is move down and away from their hand. So you're going to find that you need to turn on the musculature in places that maybe weren't working before. But see if you can do this in service of doing less work in your low back. And now lengthen the left leg and begin to do the same thing with your right leg, bringing it up and then lengthening the leg and maybe making little reaching movements down the floor as if you were reaching down with your left arm, your left hand. Feel that you're really lengthening in the armpit when you do this. And the overall idea is, again, that you could do this in such a way that the weight of the leg doesn't seem to pull you down the floor. But you remember when you were standing and you were lifting one leg and the question was about, did your head go up towards the ceiling? So it's the same idea here. Of course, you don't usually take your knees way out to the side like this when you're walking, but you can see there's a relationship. So you can try this with one leg, try it with the other, and again, see if this idea of involving the upper back by thinking of reaching with one arm or the other, does that help you to distribute the work a little bit more? Okay, take a rest. And I just want to say again that there's a lot of movements that you're doing here. You're moving the legs, which are heavy. So basically the process here involves many movements and many different variations on the movement. So again, if you get tired and I have not yet said to rest, please take a rest if you need it. Really, everything we've done and everything we're going to do before we finish is a series of variations on a theme. So even if you didn't do any particular variation that many times, the next movement is going to build on the same idea. All right. So now, please, you can practice the frog leg movement as you do this, but bring your feet to standing. And now bring your right knee up over your chest and hold in front of the knee with your left hand, just under the kneecap there. Bring your right hand to support the weight of your head. And then bring your elbow to point to the ceiling. Now, before you move, what you're going to do, it looks like a crunch, but please do not even dream of touching the right elbow to the right knee. But make a movement. It's probably a good idea to initiate as you breathe out, where you lift the head and also with your left hand, you help to bring the knee up, and the right elbow and the right knee, they come a little closer, but then you just let the knee go away and you put the head back down on the floor. And again, the idea is the quality of the movement. So even as you repeat it, how can each movement be more comfortable than the last one? And one simple thing is, if you are straining, don't lift the head as much. Don't try to bring the elbow and knee as close. Try to make a movement where the breath can remain undisturbed. And think about the shape you're making through the whole length of your spine. You're rounding yourself here. Can you soften in the chest? Okay, and then put your head down, put the foot back on the floor for a moment. And you're just going to explore variations on that. So bring the knee up again, but this time hold the knee with your right hand and have the left hand behind the head. Bring the elbow towards the ceiling. And then as you exhale, bring the elbow and the knee towards each other. But feel, how do you reach into the floor with your back? As you lift the head, and as the knee comes further up, somewhere has to put more weight into the floor, somewhere in your spine. And when you feel that, you can actually begin to incorporate that into the idea of what you're doing from the very beginning of the movement. And make sure with your right arm that's holding the leg that the right elbow can bend. And notice, does the elbow go out to the side? If it does, try keeping the elbow closer in. It's almost like you were reaching downwards towards the crease at the top of your leg with your elbow. You can think of what you were doing before when you were reaching down the floor. Think of that lengthening through your armpit. Okay, take a rest now. And now bring up the knee and hold it with both hands. You can interlace your fingers just below the knee. Have the thumb together with the other fingers. You don't have support for your head now. So use this idea of the length of the spine. As you exhale, pick up your head and then bring the knee closer. It's like you're bringing your forehead and your knee towards each other. But again, touching is not the point. It's to feel the rounding and to feel that you could lift the head and lower it in an easy, simple way. So one test of this is, whatever you're doing, what's the speed that you're doing? Can you do it even slower and have the same quality? Okay, now rest the head on the floor, and instead of supporting the knees, bring both hands behind the head interlaced. And then pick up the foot again, and you're just holding the leg there. And then as you can begin by taking both elbows towards the ceiling. And as you lift your head, again, think that the elbows reach downwards and you bring the knee up. And again, the elbow, the forehead and the knee are moving towards each other, but it feels a little different because you've switched the hands. Okay. Let everything go and have your feet standing, put the arms back on the floor, but just feel your right hip joint compared to the left. And then just make 2 or 3 explorations of taking the right knee out to the side and lengthening the leg down, pausing there, and then exploring the frog leg movement of bringing the right leg back up. And what's the quality of the movement in the right hip joint? Can you imagine the ball of the femur inside the pelvis, rolling around as the leg rotates in and out as you make the movement? And does the pelvis itself, does it want to roll a lot, or can it stay more or less where it is and you find a little more movement inside the hip joint? Okay, stand the right foot and now try a few movements with the left leg. And of course, you didn't do those variations of folding with the left leg. So see if you can sense what's different on this side. Okay, and then stand both feet again. And now you're going to explore those movements of lifting the head and folding and bringing the left knee up. And you already know what the movements are. One movement is the right hand holding the knee and the left hand behind the head. And then there's variation where it's the other hand behind your head. So you can begin moving already. I'm actually leaving it a little more up to you here. And I'm going to give you plenty of time here. But you want to feel how each variation is slightly different, how each variation asks something slightly different from your spine. And even though the movements round you, and in that sense, they kind of take the bottom of the spine and the top of the spine closer to each other. But can you think of within that rounded shape, what does it mean to have the longest spine that you could have? And is that related to the quality of your breath as you do these movements? And of course, there was the variation where you had both hands holding the leg, and there was the variation where you had both hands holding behind the head. There were also rests, right? So don't just move and move and move, but pause whenever you need to. The reason for these movements is what you felt a moment ago when you did the frog leg with the right leg and then the left leg, and you'd only done these variations with one leg. That change that took place, that's what you're after. You're after clarifying sensation. So you might be resting already, you might have done enough. I think you've done enough for now, so take a rest. But now bring the feet to standing if you have the legs long. One more opportunity to experiment with the frog leg movement. Interlace your fingers behind your head. Point the elbows to the ceiling. And now lift your head from the floor, looking down, softening the chest. And lower the head. And then do that 2 or 3 more times and pay attention to your low back. What happens there? What do you do with your pubic bone? Okay, now one at a time, in the way that you've been practicing, lengthen your legs down the floor so that they're long, and then try a few movements of lifting the head like this. What's different about that? Especially in the low back. Okay, pause. And now, one at a time, bring the feet up to stand again. And now I'm going to ask you to lift your head and keep it lifted. And so at the same time, you can determine how long you want to keep it lifted. But so if you've had your head lifted, you could put it right back down now. But then pick it up again, keep it lifted. If the elbows are close, that'll help. And now take the right knee out to the right and lengthen it down the floor. Your head is still lifted. And then take the leg out to the side, draw the heel up and stand the right foot. And then maybe you want to put the head back down on the floor. But when you're ready, you lift it again and practice the frog leg movements with your right leg, but with the head lifted. And of course, that changes the shape in your low back. So does that afford you something valuable as you make these movements? And even with this shape, think of length through the spine. Think of the top of your head reaching away from the pelvis. Okay. Bring the right foot up, rest your head for a moment. Again, sense each of the 2 hip joints. And then interlace your fingers behind your head. You could switch the interlacing of your fingers if you like, so the other thumb is on top. Might feel a little funny, but it's another little variation in your upper back when you do that. Lift the head and make the movements with your left leg. What's the expression on your face? How is your breath moving? Stand the left leg, lower your head. Now you can switch back and forth between the legs as you try this, but have your hands behind your head, bring the elbows forward towards the ceiling. And then as you lift the head, you lengthen one leg. And then as you lower the head, you draw the heel up the floor and stand the foot again. And so now something's changing the low back as you make these movements. Try to move the head and move the legs simultaneously. So as the leg goes from one position to the other, it doesn't arrive before the head. They arrive together. So you're lifting the head as one of the legs lengthens down the floor, and then you're lowering the head as you bring the leg back up. The next time you have both feet standing, lower the head and rest. And now keep the legs as they are, lift the head, and then lengthen one leg as you lower the head to the floor. As you draw the leg back up, lift the head, and then the next time you put it down, take the other knee out to the side and lengthen that leg, and keep going like that. And each one of these variations has a lot of rich information in it. And you can always play with these movements on another day. So don't worry about how many times you do the movement. Again, just take care of yourself and go ahead and rest now. Feel the length of your spine. Maybe just in your imagination, you could think of the spine lengthening. And maybe you could imagine how that activates something, not just in the spine, but in your legs and your arms. What would it mean if both arms were lengthening, both legs were lengthening? Your head was moving up. Okay, interlace your fingers behind your head. Point the elbows at the ceiling. And now there's two possibilities here, but explore lifting and lowering the head while you bring both feet to standing and lengthen both legs. So it doesn't really matter if you start with the legs long or start with the feet standing, but every movement, the position of the head changes and the position of the leg changes. And just notice how you're coordinating those two things. And then maybe leave your head on the floor one time and change the position of your legs, and then resume what you were doing. And just feel how that is. Is there still a lot of arching in the low back as you make these movements, or are you discovering maybe a little more of the work that happens right in the area of the groin? And how the image of a long spine, even as the head changes positions, might help you to do this a little simpler. Okay, rest the head, rest the legs. Now, on another occasion, exploring this same process, you might spend a lot of time really thinking about the relationship between your ankle, your knee, and your hip. And we haven't focused on that so much. But just for a moment, explore, have the legs long, and just bring one heel up as if you were going to stand the foot, and don't go that far. But just notice the line that your heel draws on the floor. Does it go directly up towards the sit bone? Or does it go a little more out to the side, or even as if it's going to cross the midline? Just try different variations. And you'll notice that as you do those things, you end up feeling the pressure on the outside of your foot in different ways. Sometimes it might be helpful to sort of lighten the heel a little bit so you feel like you're having more of the weight towards the front of the foot as you do this. Or maybe there's even a way that you pick up the front of your foot. All of these little ideas, they change the amount of rotation in the legs. We could get very specific, but we're just being playful here. But the point is, these details matter too. So see what you're discovering. And now try something interesting, which is to change both legs, except start with one leg long and one foot standing. And so the standing leg, the knee is going out to the side, and the leg that's long, it rolls out to the side and the heel begins to come up. And then it's the other foot that's standing and it's the other leg that's long. But see if you can, again, try to make these movements simultaneous so one leg doesn't get to its final destination first. And maybe there's a way that you remember what you were doing before with the arms, and one arm has a sense of reaching, and there's a activation in one armpit and then the other. But even the movement of the two legs themselves, even though one is going down and one is coming up, it's the simultaneity of the two movements that helps you balance one against the other. If you move kind of erratically, you might feel that you're wanting to roll or tilt to one side. So when's the moment when the soles of the feet are facing each other? Can you notice when they pass? The next time that you're halfway through the movement, pause. Pause in the middle with the knees out to the side and just sense how you're holding the weight of each leg. And then lengthen the one and stand the other. But again, pause in the middle. And really think of the soles of both feet now throughout the whole movement. So that'll be an interesting task for your attention, because one foot is going to be standing and the sole of the other foot is facing the wall below you. But can you track the soles of both feet as you switch, with one leg going up, the other one going down? Can you even track the big toe on each foot as you make these movements? Or how would it be different if you were tracking the pinky toe? Okay, pause, just have one leg long, one foot standing. And now incorporate what you were doing before. Bring your two hands behind your head, interlace the fingers, support your head, point the elbows towards the ceiling. And now as you switch the legs, lift your head. And then when you switch the legs again, lower your head. Take all the time you need. Just be playful with this. And then at a certain point, you'll notice you're always lifting the leg while you're standing, or you're always lifting the head, with one leg. So just switch the coordination, do one movement of the legs without changing the head, and then keep going. And then just leave the head on the floor and switch the legs. If it's beginning to get easier, you could make the movement a little faster, but you don't need to. And then just practice with one leg at a time. But see, compared to the beginning now, is it easier for you to keep a long spine and to have a sense of quiet in the low back? And even now, after everything you've done, if you feel that you begin to arch the back, can you just give up and not complete the movement? Can you start over again in such a way that you feel that you work less in the low back? That's really what this was all about. And the leg that's not moving, it could be long, it could be standing. The leg that's not moving is part of your leverage, right? So there might be a way that the heel of the leg as it's on the floor, or the sole of the foot if it's standing, it does a little something. The leg that's not moving, it might have a little activity in it. And then bend your knees and stand both feet. And now you're not going to lengthen the legs, but just do something you did in the very beginning. With one knee and then the other, just tilt the knee a few inches out to the side and bring it back. But see if you can do this without arching in the low back. So how do you use the other leg? How do you use the image of your spine? Maybe some activity in the area of your armpits. How do you keep the breath simple even as you dip the weight of the leg a little out to the side and bring it back? And then try this with both knees going out to the side and coming back. And you're not doing the whole frog leg. You're just seeing if you can hold the weight of the legs and maintain a minimum of activity in the low back as you do so. Okay, bring the feet back up to standing. And now just roll to your side and come all the way upright. And observe one last time the length of your spine. And now, as if in slow motion, begin to march in place, but very slowly so that you can listen to what happens to the length of your spine when you take the weight of one leg up away from the floor. And what would it mean to lift the leg so that it feels light? You can just lift it half an inch. Allow the knee to bend. But can you think of lifting in such a way that your whole self is lifting up away from the ground, as we've explored in some of the previous lessons as well? If you lift the leg and you let your head sink, if you let your body go down, you'll just feel that immediately the head, or rather the leg, becomes very heavy. So now walk around the room, lifting one leg and lifting the other, but how can you do this and really feel that the legs are light? Feel that walking isn't something that you have to do primarily with your low back. And great job today. There was a lot, a lot going on in that awareness through movement lesson. It's the kind of thing that if you come back to it another day, you'll make all kinds of new discoveries. And that's true really of all the lessons in this series. Once you've been through it till the end, I think you'll find if you go back again, you'll already have certain things clearer the second time around, and you'll just get even more benefit. But that's good enough for today. So we'll see you next time. Take care.